I was really enjoying the Bullitt, driving it around, daily driving it, taking it out on trips, going places with my wife, go out to get a soda. We'd put the car seats in the back and take our little boys with us. And even though I had the Mach 1, sometimes on the weekend when I wanted to go out for a nice drive, I chose to take the Bullitt. Even though I'd daily driven it all week, I just felt like taking the Bullitt. I'd meet up with my friends. This is at my brother's house. You can see all our muscle cars out there having a good time. I'd get a flat tire, problems like that would arise just from daily driving the car. I actually repaired it with my own tool this time with the licorice strip. My cousin would visit from up north in his Mach 1. He's the one who had the black Bullitt. He had a Mach 1 as well. And, he'd come visit me right when I'm going into work at night. And so there's just a picture of our cars together. And I had mentioned that I worked with my friend mobile detailing. And on good days, he'd drop me off and have a little bit of time. And we'd wash the Bullitt and clean it up, just like I had talked about earlier. And here you can see the Bullitt parked by a fence while we were detailing RVs, and this is him on top washing the roof of the RV, and I'd be up on the ladder waxing the side of the RV, and I'd look down and see the Bullitt, and it was always just a nice eye candy, something good to look at and enjoy while I was working. And I was working for this car. I was working to modify the car and race the car and build the car. Now, I always took good care of my cars, and the Mach 1's paint was beautiful and perfect, but I was noticing how bad the Bullitt was. I mean, if you remember the original pictures, I posted the car with the rippled door, and this fender was also crunched right above the wheel. You can't see it in the picture, but it was kind of rippled there too. You just couldn't see it. And the fender was starting to peel now. And so I started considering my options on how to make the Bullitt nicer. And option number one was take it to a body shop and pay to have the paint done on it. But I know that you'd have to repaint the whole car at that point for it to match nicely. And it would have been a lot of money. I started adding up what it would cost. Then I got an idea of what if I bought a True Blue Mustang that had good body panels and swapped them all over and then daily drove that other car or used it till it sold. And so I looked at a couple like this one. This is a V6 Mustang. It was true blue. It was a convertible, but it had a torn roof, and it was a pretty low price for the car. But back then, the new Edge Mustangs were still rather expensive, and you know. But at the same time, I thought, well, for the price I'd pay for a paint job, I could get a whole nother Mustang. So I kept looking, and I came across this 2002 Mustang GT. It was true blue, and it was in California in a place called Lake Forest, and it looked pretty nice, and it had a blown head gasket. And so I talked back and forth with them, and they didn't really seem to want to sell the car to anybody out of town. It was really hard to work with them, and I told them that I could come get the car, but I'd have to trailer it home, and it would be a lot of expense on my end, but I'd be ready to buy the car. And they wanted like $3,000 for it, which was still a little high for a car with a blown head gasket at the time. But I got talking back and forth, and it just seemed like we would never agree on a good time to meet up. They would always have some kind of excuse or whatever. The fact was, it belonged to the son, and the son was in the Marines, and he was away, and so they had the title, and it was in the mother's name, but he only really cared about selling the car when he was home. And so finally, it came down to the point where they said, let's get rid of the car. So they messaged me back and said, are you interested? I said, yeah, send me some more pictures. And so they sent me these pictures of the car, and I asked them, do you have the title to the car? And she said, yeah, I have the title. I said, can you make sure you have the title? Because I don't want to come all the way out there if you don't have the title. And she's like, oh yeah, we have it. It's in our file cabinet. So anyway, she got talking with me and said, you know what, I'll give you the car for $1,500. And at the time, that was really good for a GT. So I noticed in the pictures the mirror was missing and, whatever. But it looked like the parts that I needed were pretty straight and clean. And I could fix this car and daily drive it for a little while too. So I was pretty excited. So I made plans with my wife to go for a trip to California. And we decided to take our little boy and my little sister, two of my little sisters. And we stayed in this nice hotel. And we tried to make a trip out of it and have a lot of fun. We went to the beach. We did a bunch of things. And we had rented this Cummins diesel truck. So that was kind of annoying because the Suburban would have had more room for all of our stuff and everything. But once they found out I wanted to tow a car home on a trailer, they said, you have to rent this diesel truck to do it. And I said, okay, that's fine. So we rented this truck, and I had it all set up with U-Haul. And when we got to the U-Haul place there in California, they wouldn't give me the trailer. They said, according to our system, that truck cannot tow a Mustang on a trailer, which was totally stupid. I was like, how can you, a rental company, say that a diesel truck like this, crew cab, whatever, can't tow a Mustang on a trailer? And they said, well, the system says that the weight of the truck needs to be half of what the car and the trailer are together. And so I thought, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. If I can't tow it with a Cummins diesel, then what am I supposed to do? Show up in a semi-truck to tow it home? Seriously. So I fought the guy at the counter, and he finally gave me the trailer and said, okay, well, you know, you're liable, whatever, and I didn't care. So I got the truck, I got the trailer, and we headed over to where the car was. And I always love seeing a car for the first time. And here we pull around the corner, and there it was, sitting in the driveway, waiting for us to get it. Now, it had a blown head gasket, but it still ran and drove, and I was able to drive it up onto the trailer. And so I actually had to back it out of this whole complex, which I was pretty proud of. I back up trailers at work, and so I had learned how to do that really well, and it impressed my wife and my sister, so that was pretty cool. I actually had to pull all the way out backwards out of this complex, up a different street and into a cul-de-sac, all backwards, and then drive down. So that was cool. Now, something that was really interesting that became cool later was I didn't have the right pin for the tow receiver. I had a bolt and it would have worked fine, but I kind of got worried about not having an official pin. And so we went to an AutoZone and bought one. And the cool thing about that is years later when I bought my red 10th anniversary Terminator, it was in the same area in Laguna Hills, and we went to an AutoZone to get some seafoam to put in the tank because the car had been sitting and the fuel was old and I wanted to run seafoam through it. And it happened to be the exact AutoZone I went to get the pin for this trailer. So I thought that was really cool. So we even stopped at a big mall in California and had fun, and I was relieved to come out and see that the car was still on the trailer and everything was still there. And then we stopped in Bakersfield, California at In-N-Out right off the freeway, and we went to dinner, and boy, it was so cool to see the car in the trailer. It was a beautiful night. It was a nice temperature. Everything was really awesome. It was fun to take my two little sisters with us on a trip. And then we stayed in a hotel in Barstow, which was right on Route 66. So that was really fun. They had tons of memorabilia in their gift shop for Route 66. And Barstow's just a fun little town to stay in. It seems like we always stop there to eat. It's a good stopping point. We go to the Walmart there when we pass through. We stay there in the hotel like this. So I don't care what you guys say about Barstow. I like it.
And you need to go back to Barstow.
I'm not going back to Barstow.
That was funny, huh? Now, something I didn't notice until I sold my yellow Mach 1, this is me driving the Mach 1 up, I learned this later that you can actually fold the fender on the U-Haul trailer down. And this is from my brother's YouTube video. He recorded me loading the car and he showed how these trailers work. And I didn't know that at the time, so you can just pull this tab on here on each side of the fender, and then it falls down, and it has a chain that keeps it from hitting the ground. You'll see as you push it downwards. See, there's a security chain there in the middle, and I didn't know that, so I was crawling in and out of the trunk on that blue GT every time I needed to get in it for something. If we stopped somewhere, I needed to roll the windows up or do anything, but I was actually returning that trailer, and that handle was down the whole way, and I didn't know. And so when I turned, I made kind of a sharp turn to return the trailer, and the fender fell over and the chains caught it, and I was like, oh crud. But then I found out that that's what that was for, and so I wish I would have known that for the whole trip with this car. So it was nice to stay in Barstow and break up the trip a little bit, so then it wasn't all in one day back, and it was just a nice little trip. And these are the power lines that I've talked about in my other videos. I talk about it when I go to get my red 10th anniversary Cobra. It's just this part on I-15 between California and Vegas that when you get to here, it's like the only thing there. And so it's really something you remember driving underneath. And I always remember those towers. But anyway, desert drive all the way back to Vegas. We made it here to Vegas, stopped and ate at another restaurant. And this is actually the same parking lot I stopped in when I got my Competition Orange Terminator later. And then back down towards Mesquite, Nevada, and entering towards Utah. So We got the car home, and there it was right by the Bullitt. I pulled the Bullitt out next to it, looked it over. I was really excited to see that the paint matched perfectly. It was a nice shaped True Blue car, and it was just fun to have two True Blue GTs with Bullitt wheels, one a Bullitt and one a GT, and I just really liked both of these cars. So I drove the GT off the trailer, and it seemed like it was okay. The head gasket didn't seem to be blown, but it was. There was definitely coolant in the oil, and it was smoking out the exhaust a little bit, white smoke when it would warm up. And I was able to call the shop that diagnosed it, and they said, when that guy brought this car in here, it was smoking like clouds everywhere. You couldn't even see the car. He was driving it around like that. He said the expansion tank was bone dry. There was no coolant in the car. And so I added coolant, obviously, and water to the radiator just so I could drive it off the trailer. And I moved it into the garage, and then I started to tear down the Bullitt. And so I had the Bullitt outside, I had the GT in the garage where I wanted to swap the engine out and stuff later with it as well. But I had the Bullitt outside where I could start disassembling it, taking the bumper off, taking the header panel off and the fenders and everything. And this is a side of the Bullitt I had never seen before. It looked like a car that was totally wrecked. And so I got the good fender off the GT from in the garage, and when I took the bumper off the Bullitt, I found this really cool tag that was underneath the bumper. This is the location of where it is, where I'm pointing, and I thought it was really cool to find it. And if you look close, it has a bunch of numbers on it, and at the bottom it says Bullitt, B-U-L-I-T. So I thought that was really cool. So I got the fender off, the door off, the bumper off. It really was looking crazy. I even had to pull the wiring harness through the door because this was a non-mock audio car. The Bullitt was one of 54 that did not have mock audio for True Blue Bullets. And so the new door would have all the provisions for the mock audio and the tweeters and all that stuff. So I had to pull the whole harness out through the door and get it transferred over. And I also pulled out the header panel. That's what this section is called. It houses the headlights and everything. And a quick funny story about that was I had purchased a Redfire 03 GT. It's the one you see on my channel a lot, the one my sister has. I bought it from my friend because it was totaled. And I started to part the car out, but then I saved it, put it back together and fixed it. But you can see the header panel is missing in these pictures because it was broken from the accident. And so while this True Blue GT was apart and I was swapping the engine out, I had the header panel in this car when I straightened out the front end, but it wasn't bolted down all the way. But I had it in here so that I could use it and get this car running and driving, and then my sister ended up having it all through high school and everything. But in the time that I had the header panel placed in but not bolted down, I took this car for a test drive down the street just for fun, just to drive it around. And I couldn't help myself. I just had to do some donuts in the car. And so I turned the traction control off, and I started swinging donuts in this parking lot. And there were people watching me, so I didn't want to do it very long. But I did a 180, and when I did that, it threw the header panel out of the front of the car onto the ground, and I didn't notice. And I kept swinging donuts, and I actually ran over the header panel, and I crushed it into pieces. And so I stopped. I got out of the car. I looked at the people. They looked at me. I grabbed all the pieces, collected them all in my arms, threw them into the car, jumped in, shut the door, and I sped away. So, for that reason, I had to take one of the header panels and put them in this GT to get it going. So, one of these header panels was cracked anyway, so I repaired it. I think it was the one that came in the GT. I repaired it, and then I put it in that Redfire GT and got that car all straightened out and on the road. And I do want to mention that this guy standing here by the Bullitt was my neighbor, and he was a really nice guy. He was a really tough guy too, Vietnam veteran, and he'd always come over and tell me I'm doing everything wrong, but he always wanted to help, and I borrowed a lot of tools from him, and he came over and helped me line the doors up and do everything. So I just wanted to include him and thank him for all his help. So now the Bullitt looked fantastic. It looked like a brand new car all the way down. The fender and door lined up perfectly. The paint matched nicely. It looked so good. I was thrilled that all my hard work had paid off and that the whole trip was a success. And I was really happy that the Bullitt looked so good. And so I continued to daily drive the Bullitt like this, and I really enjoyed having a car that looked so much better. I couldn't really do anything about the quarter panel damage. That was okay with me because the car looked great. Now you're probably thinking, well, what did you do with that GT? Well, I continued to daily drive the Bullitt, like you see in these pictures, but then I started tearing into the engine of that GT, and I started by taking the cylinder heads off. I had it in my garage. You can see the header panel still missing, the bumper's missing. It made it easier to work on that way anyway. But I took the cylinder heads off the car, and I bought a head bolt repair kit and head gasket kit from Summit Racing, and I was ready to get it all put back together, but then I realized I was going to have to probably get the heads checked out at a machine shop, and after all that work, I just decided it'd probably be easier to buy a complete engine for this car. And I did find one that was in a Crown Victoria police car, and a guy was asking like $250 for it. So I thought, well, that's what the head gasket kit cost about, so I might as well just do that. So I rolled it into my side yard and I was getting the car prepped, and I had the wheels that had drag radials on them that were bald from all my racing, and they were 97 GT wheels, and so I put those on the car for now, and I used the new tires that were on this car for the Bullitt, so you can see it has the 97 GT wheels on it. And so I pulled the engine and the transmission out together. It was just easier to do that, and with no cylinder heads on it, it came out pretty easy. And I had my little boy walking around and helping me in the backyard. There's engines and transmissions and stuff everywhere. It was quite a mess. And the car sat without an engine in it for a little while I prepped it, and I put the hood back on so I could close it if it rained. And I had the cylinder heads. I just put them in the trunk of the car for the meantime until I sold them to somebody who wanted to redo them. And somebody came up from Las Vegas and wanted to put them on their NPI 96 to 98 GT. And I told them I had a blown head gasket, so they said they'll take it to the shop and have them looked over and everything, and it was fine. So I got the engine all prepped and ready to go on the engine stand, and I got the car ready and cleaned up everything, and I put the masking tape on the heads and cleaned it all off with Scotch-Brite like I usually do. And I mated the engine and transmission back together, and I put them in together, and it went pretty smoothly. I was able to get it all in there. Once it's in this part of the process, I'm really happy. Once it's all in place, all you got to do is bolt everything up and put it together. So it was really starting to look like a Mustang again. Now this was the short block that came out of the car, and it would have a very interesting future that it didn't know about. Now, my friend had a Kenny Bell supercharged car. It was a 2000 GT with a MMR built engine, and he melted a piston, and at the time he didn't have money for another engine, and it was kind of messed up, so he said, hey, what should I do? And I said, you know, I have this short block sitting in my backyard. It had trash bags over it, so it was protected from the elements, but still some moisture got in there, and it had some rust in the cylinder walls built up, probably from the blown head gasket mostly. And so I said, why don't you take it and put it in your car just for the meantime, at least you'll have a running car. So he cleaned it out, he put fresh oil in it, he Scotch-Brited the cylinder walls, and he took this short block and put it in that GT with the Kenny Bell on it, with E85 and with nitrous, and he ran that car for a couple of years like that before he finally threw a rod through the side of the block. And so I've made a story about this car. I can put the link in the description if you want to see the entire story of that Kenny Bell car. But here's the video clip of me and the Bullitt racing him up at the airport races, and that's with this engine in his car. So yeah, the Bullitt got gapped on that one, but of course it's going to, compared to a Kenny Bell supercharged Mustang. But that's okay. We were up there racing for fun, and we happened to get lined up next to each other. Now, later, the Bullitt would end up being just as fast as that GT, and you'll see that in the later stories. But anyway, back to this '02 True Blue GT, what I ended up doing with it was I put the engine in it and I got it running and I daily drove it, and it was a nice car to daily drive for a little while. And you can see it looked just like the Bullitt. It was kind of fun to drive it around and have something a little bit different. And it was a car that was broken and I was able to fix it. And so here's a picture of the Bullitt and the GT in the street, you know, and just the two of them together. I really like having these pictures of the two cars together and driving them around together. And I ended up selling this car to my cousin. I had it listed, and it was a nice car to drive for the meantime. I drove it for maybe 6 months or a year, and I had it listed, and a bunch of people asked about it, and these are the pictures I took of it for when I had it listed for sale. But my cousin really wanted it for his girlfriend to drive, so they bought it from me for a really good price. I gave him a better deal than anybody else. Had the mock audio system in it and everything. And you know, the interior was okay. The seat was a little bit torn up, but that's just typical for 140,000 miles, and that's what this car had on it. And anyway, they had it for a little while, and then they sold it to a friend on payments, and then it went down to Texas, and so the story of that car has gone all over the place. But it was a nice car, and I had it driving, and I really enjoyed it. But while they had it, they decided to do some paint and body work on it. They had a friend who was in the industry, and he smoothed out the door and the fender and repainted the hood scoop, and that was all fine. Now later on, my cousin needed some money, and we got into an agreement, and he decided to go ahead and trade me the hood scoop for my Bullitt's hood scoop because he had it repainted as well. This is what the hood scoop on my Bullitt looked like. It was obviously oxidized and faded, and it had been wet sanded. I tried wet sanding it and cleaning it up a little bit, but there were some burn marks through it, and it just didn't look very good. So I took the hood scoop off the Bullitt, and you can see how dirty it was underneath the scoop from before. I cleaned that all up, made it look really nice, and then I took the hood scoop from his car, and you can see how nice it looked, painted true blue, and I installed that on the Bullitt. So now the Bullitt had a really nice hood scoop on there. So for the time that I had them, I really enjoyed having two true blue Mustang GTs, one being my Bullitt and the other one a daily driver, and I really liked that car. It was real clean. Something else I did to the exterior of the Bullitt for a short time until I got a replacement was I did borrow the mud flap piece from my cousin. He was keeping his Bullitt at my house free of charge. I was storing it for him, and so I just decided to take that mud flap piece off for a little while and run it on the Bullitt. So that's how it was for a little while. It looked good, and I ended up giving that back, and then you'll see in later videos that I got my own replacement piece. But being black on a true blue car, on that little piece, you didn't really notice. So it looked pretty good for the time. So thanks for watching. That'll complete this section of the next part of the Bullitt's upgrades, the Bullitt story. There is so much more to come, a lot of really neat things, so stay tuned. Thanks for watching.